Well, for more on the situation in Syria, let's talk to Nasser Wedadi, who's in Boston. He's an outreach director at the American Islamic Conference that promotes civil liberty reforms in the Middle East. Nasser Wedadi, it's been the bloodiest weekend so far since the protests began, dozens of people killed. What do you think is behind this decision by the government to use live ammunition against the protesters?
I think that, first of all, one has to call things by their name. This is a crime against humanity. Killing 100 protesters who went out peacefully to make their voices heard or mourning their dead is nothing short of a crime against humanity and warrants an indictment in the International Criminal Court for this behavior. Now, about the decision of the Syrian government, something is very interesting and important here to highlight is that if Bashar al-Assad is indeed in control of his regime, this then uncovers the nature of the Ba'athist regime in Syria. And if he, as his propaganda machine, is claiming that he gave publicly orders to stop that, then that shows you that he's not in control. So either way, Bashar al-Assad is unfit for ruling Syria, and his regime is unfit for ruling Syria. And I think that if they keep on this behavior, they will drag the country and its society, which is very complex, down a much bloodier path. This has to stop, and the international community, and I think the Arab world primarily, has to step up and support the Syrian people against this mass murderer.
But significantly, though, many people thought that with the scrapping of the emergency law, that would have put an end, perhaps, to the deadly crackdown. That's not happened. So what was the purpose of scrapping the law in the first place?
Again, like with this is an informational media war, and unfortunately, the Syrian government has lost all credibility. Take, for instance, just today, there were protesters going out in the street, and the Syrian TV claims that these are people who came out to thank God for rain after years of drought. And somebody on Twitter pointed out that the drought is one of democracy and freedom that has been lasting for the last almost 50 years. And the scrapping of these laws, again, is part of that duality, is that the regime seems to be schizophrenic. And the reality of it is that, again, the fundamental question is that really who is in charge of Syria? And the evolution of the situation shows you that those who are in a position of responsibility in Syria are either murderers or are not in charge. And either way, they have to go, because otherwise this country is going to collapse.
And that's an important point you make about the solidarity of the regime, because we've seen two senior MPs and a senior cleric resign. How significant do you think those resignations are? And are we starting to see cracks in the Ba'ath Party appear?
I think that actually these are very significant developments, because it is almost the first time, with one probably exception, in the past 10 years that somebody resigned so publicly. And the fact that at least one of these MPs resigned live on Al Jazeera is a massive slap to the regime. But you have to get back to the basics of the regime. Right now, the only option left for Bashar al-Assad is to deploy the armed forces, because clearly the multiple intelligence services are unable to hold the Syrian people at bay. And that puts the regime in an existential conundrum. Don't forget that this is a conscript army with a hard core of highly trained divisions that are loyal to the regime. And then now, I think this is the serious escalation and the test of truth. The moment of truth, the day of reckoning will come when Bashar al-Assad is forced to deploy the military into the cities to quell the protest. And the risk that they're underrunning, and I think that's when we will understand how significant these cracks will be, if the conscripts and the soldiers start refusing orders or even joining the protesters. That will be the end of the regime as we know it. And that's a situation that is ultimately of the making of Bashar al-Assad.
Let me just get a final thought from you, because at first people in Syria were calling for reforms. Now it seems they've hardened their stance with all these killings and shootings. They want the regime and President Assad to go. Is there any other way out now for the regime apart from the security option? I mean, if he made more concessions, would that work, or is it just too late now?
I think that the laws of physics apply in this situation. Every action has an equal reaction opposite in direction. And you have to understand that the Syrian regime has outlived its purpose and has outlived its purpose in the lives of Syrians and Syrian societies. They have failed in delivering everything that they had been promising and talking about in the last 50 years. And here's my last thought. My last thought is that if Bashar al-Assad still has any grain of self-respect, has to immediately put a halt to these killings and these crimes against humanity, and start a national dialogue with the first step by canceling Article 8 of the Syrian constitution that gives the Ba'ath Party supremacy over Syrian society.
Okay.
It's either freedom or it's all-out confrontation.
Okay.
The day of the reckoning has come.
Nasser
and
Weddadi,
he has to
thank
act
you. We have to leave it there. Thank you very much
indeed.
indeed. Thank you.